So, Matt, very few of us understand why Donald Trump is burdening the rest of the world with these tariffs.
Yes. And so I'm going to share a graph with you, and the graph shows the nature of global trade balances. And what that graph shows you is that in the green, there is the United States with a very large trade deficit, and there is in the red, China with a very large trade surplus.
And the rest of the
And
world is a bunch of minnows compared to those two giants.
yeah, absolutely.
So why does that matter? Because I thought the whole point of globalization was that this would balance out so that poor countries would service wealthy countries and so on.
So it matters because open capitalist countries, when they trade with each other, shouldn't be able to accumulate material trade surpluses over time. Because if you have a trade surplus, that should appreciate the value of your currency. And that would act as a mechanical stabilizer to your trade surplus because your exports become less competitive because your currency appreciated, and also imports become more competitive with your domestic production. And so there is that mechanical adjustment that should be happening. And the fact that it is not happening is reflective. It's a feature, not a bug, of the Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is not a open sort of capitalist economy. It is a controlled economy. In China, when they say we're going to get 5% GDP growth, they mean it. They're going to get 5% GDP growth. And the left-hand graph here, what it's showing you is the method of delivering that GDP growth up until about 2020, and that was leaning on investment in residential property construction. Because there was sufficient demand domestically to purchase and invest, households to invest in residential property. And that was a way that if consumption growth was 2.5%, and so there was a 2.5% gap to get GDP growth at 5%, then the government would step in and encourage further lending to property developers or directly fund infrastructure projects to bridge that gap, and they would hit their target. So it's a different style of economy. When they say they're going to hit 5%, they mean it. And what changed is in 2020, the Chinese domestic population lost confidence in building and in residential property specifically as an investment. And so there was no longer the ability to just keep ramping up investment in building more homes because the market wasn't there to absorb that. And so the Chinese economy had to pivot, and they pivoted to investment in their manufacturing industrial base. And that's really ramped up since 2020. And that's been supported by direct subsidies from the government. And what the right-hand graph is showing you is the number of industrial enterprises that are now running at a loss because government is continually forcing investment into expanding the capacity of the industrial enterprise base and the manufacturing capacity of the Chinese economy. But there is just a lack of domestic demand to absorb that. And so what's happened is China's had to export that surplus capacity, and that's leading to now a rising trade balance, trade surplus that China has with the rest of the world, and that's can probably keep growing. In fact, the data's just come out recently that it's accelerating into the beginning of this year as well.
In that case, aren't Trump's tariffs a good way of slowing that down? Is there a method to the madness?
So I would think the strategy or the strategic context behind the tariffs, I totally agree with. Like there is an internal imbalance in the Chinese economy that is being exported and weakening trading partners. And so I can understand the need to try and counter that. Whether or not tariffs are the right tool to do that is a good question. I don't necessarily know the answer to it. Certainly, the tactical approach in tariffing everyone at the same time, and the sort of convoluted way that those reciprocal tariffs were calculated, I don't think is particularly productive.
If not tariffs, then what? What's the alternative to tariffs if because almost every economist is complaining about the tariffs, but what's the alternative?
So tariffs are a friction and they are inefficient, but they can make sense when a country has an internal imbalance that they're exporting. So most economies don't have that internal imbalance, and so tariffs don't make any sense. So it doesn't make any sense that there are tariffs on Australia or Canada or the EU to a lesser extent, you know. So, but tariffs I think can make sense against China. But a better mechanism would be encouraging China to address the internal imbalance that it has. And so
Yeah, but
I don't
China,
know how you do.
you can't exactly ring President Xi and say, mate, you've got an imbalance, can you fix it up? Because that 5% target that he's got suffers.
That's right. That's right. It's really difficult, and so I think in the fullness of time there'll be an acknowledgement that there is a trading imbalance here, and it needs to be addressed. It would be better to address it through sort of a coalition of trading partners and through some sort of World Trade Organization or some sort of other institution that promotes fair and balanced trade, as opposed to externalizing your internal weakness. But yeah, there isn't actually a good answer to this question, and I certainly don't have a particularly good one either. But this is something that people are talking about. How do you actually intercede in a controlled economy that's got goals that are not necessarily attractive to trading partners?
What a conundrum. Matt, thanks very
Yeah.
much.
Cheers.